She was so happy, and she would sing. We would sing Itsy Bitsy Spider. Sometimes she would say, "No, Papa, I sing it myself."
She abused her. Everyone knows she abused her.
On a crisp October morning in 2005, Ray Dawn Smith set out for a routine errand, picking up her stepdaughter from school. It was a day like any other, until it wasn't. When she pulled back into her driveway, her world shattered. Paramedics swarmed her home. Her 2-year-old daughter, Kelsey Smith Briggs, who had been vibrant and healthy just hours before, now clung to life. Moments later, the unthinkable happened. Kelsey was gone. As grief engulfed Ray, shock gave way to horror. She was arrested, accused of a crime no mother could fathom. What led to Kelsey's heartbreaking death? Why was Ray thrust into the center of suspicion? And in the shadow of this tragedy, what chilling truths lie buried, waiting to unravel the mystery of a little girl's final hours?
I can't get it through my heart yet that I'm not going to see her anymore.
On October 11th, 2005, Ray left her 2-year-old daughter, Kelsey Smith Briggs, at home with her husband, Michael Porter, who was also Kelsey's stepfather. She was heading out to pick up Michael's daughter from school like she always did. At the time of her departure, the 2-year-old was asleep in her bed, wearing nothing but a t-shirt. The couple dressed her in the t-shirt because they were running out of pull-ups and couldn't afford to buy new ones. Everything seemed perfectly fine, but that was about to change. By the time Ray returned home, an ambulance was parked outside her house. Kelsey wasn't breathing and needed urgent medical attention. The little girl, who had been wearing only a t-shirt at the time of her mother's departure, was now dressed in a pull-up. Michael claimed he changed her clothing because he didn't want people thinking they were lousy parents. An ER doctor later stated that Kelsey had likely been sick for at least 45 minutes before help arrived. To make matters worse, her cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the abdomen. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, the authorities uncovered something even more disturbing. The little girl had been assaulted. At this point, there was only one person who could provide answers about what happened, and that was Michael Porter, because he was the only one home with the child when it all went down. 9 days after Kelsey's death, Michael was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But in a shocking twist, her mother was also arrested, even though she was nowhere near the house at the time of the incident. So what really happened to Kelsey? To understand that, we have to start from the very beginning.
The time we had with her, but it shouldn't end the way it did.
Kelsey Smith Briggs was born on December 28, 2002, to Ray Dawn Smith and Lance Briggs, who were the typical high school sweethearts. Both attended Meeker High School, where Lance was a football player and Ray was a cheerleader. Their relationship blossomed after graduation, and not long after, Ray got pregnant. The lovebirds were excited about this development and began making plans for their future. But just days before their wedding, she suffered a miscarriage. Despite the heartbreaking loss, they chose to go ahead with the wedding. On July 15, 2000, the young lovers exchanged vows on Ray's parents' front porch. However, what started as a fairy tale romance soon turned sour. The couple enjoyed partying, drinking heavily, and their relationship became increasingly volatile. By the time they'd been married for about a year, things had spiraled out of control. In May 2001, the police were called to their home after Lance allegedly tried to hurt Ray. She told officers that their argument over a McDonald's meal escalated when her husband threw her against the wall and placed his forearm around her throat. Police observed visible injuries on her neck and collarbone that backed up her story. Lance was immediately arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. His mother, Kathy Briggs, later came forward with a different version of events. She claimed that Ray had been planning to go out that night, and Lance had taken her keys to prevent her from leaving. Kathy alleged that her son's wife had fabricated the story she told police to get back at him. Regardless of the conflicting accounts, The injuries on Ray's neck were undeniable, and the authorities had enough evidence to arrest Lance. In the end, he pleaded no contest, was placed on probation, and ordered to attend anger management classes. But this wouldn't be the end of the drama between the two. In the months that followed, Ray had to call the police several more times, and things only got worse from there.
What do you think she meant?
Well, she's still bitter because she feels like if I hadn't contacted DHS to report her, then none of this would have happened.
On May 30th, 2002, she filed for divorce. According to her, Lance wouldn't leave her alone. She said he would sneak into her house, leave behind handwritten notes begging her to take him back, and sometimes threatening her if she didn't. But it didn't matter what Lance did because Ray was done. She had made up her mind, and there was no turning back. On July 31st, 2002, the divorce was finalized. The two were officially ready to go their separate ways. But what they didn't know was that things were about to get even more complicated. Ray was pregnant, and she didn't even know it yet. 5 months later, she gave birth to Kelsey. Lance had doubts about the child being his, so he immediately asked for a DNA test. The results confirmed that he was indeed the child's biological father. From the start, Kelsey was caught between two parents who couldn't get along. Her mother had primary custody, but the court had ordered shared visitation, so she still had to spend time with her father and grandparents on both sides of the family. Life on Ray's end wasn't exactly stable either. She'd moved back in with her parents, and since her father was dealing with serious health issues, she had to rely on state assistance to help raise her daughter. She eventually took on multiple jobs, working in elderly care and at a manufacturing plant, just to keep things afloat and give her daughter the best she could. On the other hand, Lance had moved on with his life and started a new relationship with his best friend's sister, Ashley Lytle. By June 2003, the two got married and began building a life together. But back home, his mother made it her mission to defend her son to anyone who would listen. According to Kathy, he was a good son who had never been violent toward his ex-wife. She even claimed that Ray had lied about every single incident reported to the police. And when she wasn't defending her son, she was working hard to paint Ray as an unfit mother. She stalked her, digging for anything that could be used against her. Then she'd call the police and feed them exaggerated or outright false information. In one of those calls, she claimed that Ray was driving recklessly and speeding. But that lie was quickly exposed. An officer happened to be on the same road at the time, and he reported that no one was driving the way Kathy had described. Even though her plan failed, Kathy didn't back down. Her goal was simple: make Ray look bad in the eyes of the authorities and gain custody of her granddaughter. Somewhere along the line, Lance joined the U.S. Army Reserve, and by September 2004, he was called to active duty in Iraq. With her son heading off to war, the grandmother worried that Ray might try to cut her out of Kelsey's life. So she took her concerns to court, hoping to get a judge's assurance that she'd still be allowed visitation while Lance was away. For a while, everything seemed fine. The little girl continued visiting her father's side of the family regularly. But things began to shift in late 2004, after her grandfather on her mother's side passed away. With that chapter of her life behind her, Ray decided it was time for a fresh start.
Briggs says the last time they saw Kelsey was a couple months before her death. He noticed bruising on her body and blood spots in her eyes, all of it heartbreaking.
She got an apartment for herself and her daughter and was ready to move forward with her life. The mother and daughter duo were settling into their new home right around the time she met Michael Lee Porter, the man who would eventually become her husband. The two met at a Shawnee bar called Hot Rods, where they danced, hit it off, and started dating not long after. Michael was already a father of two and the president of his family's magnet plant in Meeker. Ray was happy with her new relationship, and her daughter seemed to be thriving. She was a healthy, cheerful, and well-mannered little girl. Her favorite movies were Brother Bear, Shrek, and Monsters, Inc. She also had a beloved Cabbage Patch Kids doll that she played with every night before bed. On top of that, she had a bright personality and had even won Miss Personality at a baby pageant in Shawnee. But things started to change in January 2005, shortly after Michael entered their lives. The little girl began turning up with strange injuries. One day, her mother noticed she was crying and struggling to move her arm. She took her to the doctor, who found multiple bruises, a broken collarbone, and fractures in both legs. Ray told the doctor that Kelsey had fallen out of bed during the night. The explanation seemed plausible at the time, and the doctor didn't suspect abuse. But just a few days later, the child's father, who was home on leave, noticed the bruises too.
Little Kelsey would have been 22 this December. Her biological father's family says hearing the news about Ray Dawn Smith's commutation hearing scheduled for next week is shocking and unexpected.
He and his wife Ashley were giving her a bath during a visit when they saw the marks all over her face and body. Concerned, they took her back to the same hospital where she'd been treated earlier. Lance and his mother believed Ray had intentionally hurt Kelsey, and they didn't hesitate to share their concerns with the doctors. A nurse even agreed, saying the bruises on her body looked like signs of abuse. With that, the police were brought in to investigate. Lance told the officers that his ex-wife could get out of hand sometimes, especially if she had been drinking. But when the police spoke to Ray, she had her own version of events. She admitted she knew about the bruises on Kelsey's face and said they were from a fall off the bed. As for the other marks, she said she had no idea how those happened. The officers noted that Ray seemed sincere and genuinely concerned about her daughter. In the end, they concluded that the injuries were likely from typical childhood accidents. But Kathy wasn't buying it. She still believed Ray was to blame and kept pushing that narrative. On January 24, 2005, an emergency court hearing was held to determine what was best for Kelsey. The judge ended up removing her from dear mother's care and placing her with her paternal grandmother, Kathy. A child welfare worker had looked into the case and found that Ray had given conflicting accounts about how her daughter got hurt. Ray also told the caseworker that she occasionally spanked Kelsey on the bottom, but only while she was wearing diapers. Her boyfriend Michael backed her up, saying she was a good mom who would never intentionally hurt her child. A few weeks later, Ray was allowed to see her daughter again, but only under supervision. Those supervised visits lasted about a month, and then the court gave her permission to have unsupervised overnight visits. The only condition was that her boyfriend couldn't be around during those visits. For a while, things seemed to settle. Kelsey began splitting her time between her mother's home and her grandmother's. It wasn't perfect, but at least there was some stability. Then in April, the bruises came back, and this time they were harder to ignore. Something was clearly wrong, but once again, the adults were too busy pointing fingers at each other. According to Ashley, Lance's wife, Kelsey always had new bruises whenever her mother dropped her off. Ray usually had an explanation, but Ashley wasn't convinced. She suspected that Ray's boyfriend had something to do with it.
You know, why is she not pointing the finger at Michael Porter right now? Why is she pointing it to me? Is it because she knows she did it?
That same month, on April 18th, Ray and Michael got married at the courthouse in Shawnee. But just days before the wedding, Kelsey had injured her right leg after a trip to the zoo. Her mother took her to the doctor, who said it was a sprained ankle and told her to let the child rest until it healed. The very next day, Ray went to Child Protective Services to report the injury. But by the time her wedding day rolled around, it was obvious that Kelsey was still limping. After the ceremony, she was dropped off at her grandmother's house for the night. The grandmother would later claim that Kelsey was in so much pain that she refused to walk for the rest of the night. But oddly enough, instead of taking her to see a doctor, Kathy brought her to a gymnastics class. It didn't make much sense. If the child was really in that much pain, why take her to do physical activity? After spending 4 days with her grandmother, Kelsey was returned to her mother. Ray took one look at her and felt something wasn't right, so she brought her back to the hospital. Doctors discovered spiral fractures in both her legs and placed casts on them to help her heal. But just days later, Kelsey was back at her grandmother's house. This time, Kathy took her to a different doctor. one who, for some unexplained reason, removed the casts. When Kelsey was returned to Ray, she took her back to her original doctor, who reapplied the casts. At this point, things were clearly getting out of hand. The back and forth wasn't just exhausting, it was dangerous. And now, Child Protective Services were beginning to wonder if someone in Kathy's household was intentionally harming Kelsey. They didn't have concrete proof, but the suspicions were growing. Then, in late April 2005, Kelsey showed up with yet another injury, this time a quarter-sized bruise near her eye. Ray said Kelsey's 7-year-old stepsister accidentally hit her while she was sleeping. Under normal circumstances, that might have been believable. But by now, the number of injuries the little girl had sustained was too alarming to ignore. Child Protective Services intervened once more, pulling Kelsey from Ray's care. This time, rather than returning her to her paternal grandmother, Kathy, the court placed her with Ray's mother, Kelsey's maternal grandmother. Ray and Kathy were restricted to supervised visits, held under the watchful eyes of DHS staff at their office.
She feels like if I hadn't contacted DHS to report her, then none of this would have happened.
Ensuring Kelsey's safety amid the escalating tensions. Whenever Kathy visited, the authorities noticed that Kelsey would try to hide, run away, or even throw things at her. In contrast, she was warm and welcoming during visits with her mom. Around this time, Child Protective Services tried to get in touch with Kelsey's father, but couldn't reach him. Kathy claimed his military duties kept him constantly on the move, which was why he was unavailable. Following a custody hearing in June, the court decided to place Kelsey back in her mother's care. However, the judge ordered regular in-home check-ins to ensure the child's safety. Over the next few weeks, Child Protective Services made several visits to Ray's home, and each time, the child appeared well taken care of, with no visible signs of abuse. Kelsey was absolutely fine and well looked after for months until everything crumbled that fateful day in October when she died mysteriously. As the authorities began their investigation, they found disturbing under 18 contents on Michael's computer. The investigation took a more disturbing turn when Michael's daughter gave the authorities new information about her father. She told her guidance counselor that her father only played nice with Kelsey when other people were around, but when no one was looking. He would be mean to the child. She also said that whenever Michael gave the 2-year-old a bath, she would always vomit and cry. To make matters worse, the 7-year-old stated that she had seen her father take Kelsey into a room and close the door behind them. By the time they emerged from the room, Kelsey was seen crying bitterly. While she didn't explicitly mention seeing Kelsey being assaulted, the incidents she described were enough to raise red flags and back up the possibility that the 2-year-old may have been sexually assaulted on multiple occasions. Subsequently, Michael was charged with first-degree murder and sexual assault. In February 2007, Michael Porter accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to enabling child abuse and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. In July that year, Ray Dawn Smith was convicted of enabling child abuse and was sentenced to 27 years in prison. The case of Kelsey Smith Briggs was especially tragic because it wasn't hidden. It played out right in front of the system meant to protect her. With multiple reports, hospital visits, court hearings, and Child Protective Services interventions, Kelsey's suffering was visible, yet nothing stopped it. Ray Dawn Smith was sentenced to 27 years in prison. But was that fair? Did the punishment match her level of responsibility? Or did the system use her as a scapegoat for its own failure? What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments. If you're interested in more cases like this one, don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check out the next video below.